Welcome to this Thursday class, which is another one looking at developmental pattern support. Now, I explored this principle a bit last week and wanted to continue it because there are many things to possibly explore with the developmental patterns. And if you're more familiar with them already, a lot of this will be kind of deepening and chance to repeat and go into these ideas. And if you're more new to them, that's also totally fine. And why would we do these developmental patterns? What's the kind of underpinning idea? Well, it's about bringing to consciousness patterns of organization in our movement so that we can have more choices about how we differentiate our coordination and how we might find some different kinds of possibilities. From being in the womb to walking, we went through various different ways of traveling, ways of changing level, very much about being low to the ground and using our body weight to kind of shift and mobilize and roll. And this is all bringing in these patterns in the body of how we use our limbs, our spine, our relationship to gravity, our breath. So these very fundamental qualities or concepts that we're working with. And the developmental patterns of support are patterns of coordination. They aren't specific movements, but we will do specific movements to also elicit them. And they have lots of relationships between them. So one will be there and then the next one emerges and the other one is carrying on underneath as a support for the next one. So there's this kind of interconnected sort of sense of them, and you can go back and forth as much as you like, really. And sometimes if you're struggling with one pattern, it's useful to go to the pattern before. Now, often as children, we may not have gone through each of them in the same amount of time or with the same amount of attention. Your environment may have been very stimulating. You had maybe older siblings running around and you went from, I don't know, sitting and rolling to like crawling really quickly and then we're up, you know. So revisiting these and kind of slowing things down can be a way of just reawakening that pattern in your body. And of course, it's very useful if you have injuries to kind of backtrack a little bit and see what's going on in terms of pain or particular areas in your musculature which is more tight or more blocked. And so today I'd like us to explore these developmental patterns as a support for going from lying to sitting. And we'll do it in a few different ways. It'll be similar to those of you who did the Tuesday class. And this is in order to kind of carry on this exploration of being low to the ground to a mid-level. And as in the Bartenieff Fundamentals, which is understood to be a somatic practice, but with this aspect more from the element of Laban, we're going to emphasize also the use of space. And by that, I simply mean opening eyes and being able to see. So some somatic modalities emphasize closed eyes, inner sensing exploration, which we also do. But opening the eyes is this bridge to the outer in order to feel the motivation of the things in space to mobilize you to level change, to roll, to be kind of in the environment. So we'll do all of those things. What else did I want to say? So some of these movements I will share will be more fast, more vigorous, more playful. Some of it will be more slow, more specific. And I encourage you to make the choices that make sense for your body. Don't make anything, that's going to obviously make you uncomfortable. Feel free to be as comfortable as you need with all of this. So you're welcome to use movements that are familiar to you. So if you have some dance material already that you like to play with, or yoga asana, or something that you feel is familiar, feel free to kind of place that in there and see how it feels. Or you're also welcome to just kind of explore and feel that things arise that are more unfamiliar. Welcome, Margaret, you just joined us.
Hi.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions before we get moving? Is there anything? No? Super, so I would ask you all to mute yourselves if you're not already muted. Thank you. Marvellous. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with some very easy rolling. Find a place on the ground to lie down and explore simply rolling on the ground as a way of connecting to the whole of the surface of your skin feeling a pouring of your body's weight as you change the surfaces of support. Using this rolling to sensitize breath, how the flow of breath can support you. And in your rolling, play with what each limb might be able to do. It might travel into the air, it might travel towards the center of your body, it might reach away. Let's go through the right arm and the left arm, the right leg and the left leg. So you can find these long tendrils that can mobilize as part of the roll. And you can also connect to the top of the skull and a sense of the spine as a limb. We can think of navel center to the top of the head, through the rib cage, through the neck, into the skull. And we can sense into the lower part of the spine from the belly button into the tailbone, into the bowl of the pelvis. So as much as we might think of gesturing with the foot or with the hand, you could also think of gesturing with tailbone, gesturing with skull. One more minute of rolling, feeling this inner experience of your body's forming, reforming, flowing, of how all these parts can differentiate and be reconnected. And depending on what surface you're on, you might find sliding more easy, which is going to activate perhaps more of your sense of flow. Or you might find a bit more pressing, condensing your body's weight into the ground, activating a little bit more of your sense of your body's weight. How you can activate it to push, to press. And this combination of flow and weight is what helps us mobilize, roll, shift, pour. Lovely. And let's activate the sense of the navel center being the organizing center to 6 limbs, head, tail, hands and feet. And roll to one side, bring head and tail close to each other, hands and feet close to each other in a little ball. And then you can use the flow of an inhale to roll yourself onto your back. Right at the end of the exhale, condensing, bending elbows and knees, bringing head and tail towards each other, coming into a small ball. And then inhaling, spreading onto the ground. So here we continue this sense of rolling now with a little bit more form. Making the journey of the arms and the legs and the head and the tail more simultaneous, condensing and arriving in a big X at the same time. And you're welcome to explore this, rolling yourself onto your front surface, rolling yourself onto your side. Coming into a sense of your whole body. With every part involved. So finding front surface, side surfaces. We're playing really with the pattern of radial symmetry. Head, tail, hands and feet. Radiating from the navel center, finding a way towards and away into the far reach of your space, more into the near reach. And this pattern is related to more undifferentiation. Even though we can move each limb quite separately, let's think of them working more together, a bit like in the image of a jellyfish or a starfish. And then let's find ourselves on hands and knees. Okay, and then you can come just to sit for a moment. The next pattern we'll do is more activating head and tail, finding a little reach through the top of the skull and a reach through the tailbone. And this is one that we don't need to do lots of. It's not one that you need to do like hundreds of repetitions of. I think it will be more useful to do a few and then leave it alone. So next in the developmental progression of core to periphery, this kind of radial symmetry pattern we were just exploring is the development of the head and the tail. And head-tail connection, as I said before, doesn't happen only in one particular movement, it happens throughout many different kinds of activity. But we can activate this sense of the relationship between the head and the tail in a few different ways. One of them is heel rock, which we'll do in a minute. But this first one I'd like us to show, you'll definitely need something soft underneath you. And it's going to be, I'm going to be quite muffled as I do this because my head will be over. But what I'm aiming to do is shift a little bit my base of support from my lower body onto the top of my skull and then push through my skull to return back to my shins. I'll show you. So I'm here. And I'm going to press through my shins, reaching onto my skull, sensing the top of my skull here. And then press through my skull to find a reach through tailbone to bring me back to my shins. So it's not about going into a headstand. It's not about staying anywhere very long. It's about sensing this relationship of the head and the tail, how you can press through the shins, press through the tail, reach through the skull, to feel the shift of base of support onto the top of the skull, and then press through skull. Visualizing that message being sent from top of skull through the vertebrae to the tailbone. So your hands are there to support you, and your breath is steady. And I'm curious about how the movement starts, how you make this first shift onto the top of your skull. You might start it from a sense of reach through the top of the skull that then reminds you to find the push underneath. Or you might start from the push from the tail, travel it through to the skull. And to come back, you might reach from tail or start from skull to find the reach in the tail. As I say, we don't need to do too many of these. That there is something particularly useful about feeling the top of your head. If you don't have a headstand practice, and it's not somewhere that you're generally using as a base of support in other parts of life, and it can be useful to remind yourself of this bony landmark through contact with the ground. Okay, bring yourself up to sitting if you're not already. And from sitting, placing one hand on sacrum and one hand on skull, take a few moments to feel this concave, convex relationship of the spine in this sagittal aspect, this forward and back, front back relationship. And then you've also got the possibility of going sideways, finding head and tail relating through the sides. So maybe you can't feel it quite so clearly with the tailbone here, but you can imagine the tailbone trying to join with the skull. And then we've got obviously rotation possible. And here you can think of actually bringing the pelvis forward and back on one side if you like, and taking skull in the opposite direction. We're waking up head-tail connection, paying attention to these three different possible spatial organizations of the forward and backness, side-sidedness, or kind of, vertical plane, but the spine is going more to the side. And then we have this rotation through the vertebrae, giving us access to the horizontal around us. Okay, let's play with that a little bit with taking ourselves into the ground, so you can find concavity of the spine to bring you down or to bring you back up again. The side-sidedness of the spine to take you into a small ball on the side. Or a rotation of the spine with the knees bent maybe. So we've got a few different patterns you can find coming up to a small ball. You can feel the radial symmetry underneath this, but I'm more concentrating on the activation of my spine to do this. And then side-sidedness of the spine to condense me one side and the other side, and my limbs are just folding along as I go. I'm not particularly bothered about what they're doing. I'm more bothered about my spine, head and tail coming towards the navel center. And then I've got the possibility of finding what my spine does. If I find skull going one way, tailbone reaching in the other way. So I'm focusing on this relationship of pelvis to skull and the vertebrae in between. And then let's extend the legs and take a heel rock. So this is the action of flexing through the ankle joint, using the heel bone as a pivot point to send a rock through the whole body into the skull so the skull can nod on the ground. And allowing a release through the pelvis, softening through rib cage, relaxing the tongue and the mouth. So we have the spinal column, and then we have all the soft tissues, all the organs lying in front of the spine, all the organs of the belly, organs of the chest, resting on top of the spine here on the inner surface of the vertebrae. And then up into the brain, we have the eyes and the brain sloshing about in the skull. So our head-tail connection that we can think of through skeletal landmarks, through the bones. Here I'm drawing our attention to the corresponding sense of the organs in this axis of length, which we might also think as a support for head-tail connection. And then slowing heel rock down. And you might want to place your hands on your navel center or hands to the ground. Let's take some long exhales, and right at the end of the exhale, slide right heel towards sitting bones so the knee is bent. And then use an inhale to slide the heel away. Very gently finding another exhale right at the end of the exhale, sliding the heel towards the sitting bone. And then using the flow of the inhale to reach the heel away. Now, if you're not on something particularly slidey, you might want to stick an extra blanket underneath your heel so you can pull a blanket towards you. It's going to be quite tricky on a sticky mat to get that sense of softening through the pelvis so we can activate more of the deeper postural muscles. So a couple of more of those in your own time, exhaling to slide the heel towards the sitting bone. So there's a spatial intent here through the bone towards the pelvis. But you might also think of floating the knee. So here we're starting to mobilize lower body, or rather just one of our 6 limbs of the lower body. The supporting leg is staying fairly stable. It's not gripped so hard, but it's not so passive that the leg is flopped out. So there's a sense of spatial intent through the length of that leg also. And remembering the rest of the spine here could be part of this experience. So as you inhale to lengthen the leg, you might think of reaching skull in the opposite direction. And to bring the heel in, you might think of shortening slightly in the spine to gather heel towards pelvis. And feeling a gentle reach through top of skull to find that length to reach away. But it's not the kind of spatial intent that feels like it's a very active, like laser beam that takes you into more bound flow. If you feel that image of reaching the skull makes you very tense, then maybe it's going to inhibit some of the connection through the core. So don't do it quite so strongly though. By that I mean, if I'm really activating my spatial intent out through my skull and out through my heels and really activating my muscles to do that, I might think of not really softening anywhere to make that happen. And it's possible to do thigh lift like that. But I would be curious about what happens if it can be a little bit more relaxed. And it will be different for each of you, how much activation and how much softening makes sense. And I'd like you to play with that sense of sometimes really exerting, using all your muscles in a particular level of tension. And then seeing actually, how can you still make that same movement a bit more casually, a bit more softly. Maybe that will feel more lazy to you, that's also fine. So there's something there about the kind of inner motivation of this action being a way of testing out your flow, a way of checking in with how you feel about it. How letting go a little bit more might make you feel more unstable through the pelvis. Or maybe it feels like it's easier. And you might find again that an exhale helps shorten lower body or the spine to bring the heel in, and an inhale helps expand you long. But maybe that breathing is counterintuitive if you've done a lot of Pilates. So again, it's an opportunity to explore and find some different kinds of ways of coordinating. I think that's enough pre-thigh lifts for now. Let's go to finding both knees bent in this supine hook position. And same initiation right at the end of the exhale. Now simply bend, flex at the hip socket to float the knee. And as you float your knee, try not to extend through the heel and try not to collapse the space between your heel and your sitting bone, keeping it in that organization spatially. And then you can feel your sitting bone with your fingertips underneath your bum, and you can direct that bone down to the ground to find a stamp. Now it's going to be quite noisy, but I can't hear you. You can hear me, so I'll try not to stamp too loudly. But in your own space, you can really, if it's fine with your neighbours, put your foot down and feel that active return of the leg, softening to lift the thigh, and then stamping the foot down, taking the bone with you to bring the weight of the leg down. So this is an active return of the lower, using the spatial intent of the bone to bring the leg down. So that will be the activated version, and you can also find a more passive version. So exhaling, again, floating the knee, and then inhaling, letting go, and allowing the foot to return with passive weight. So it'll go back to where it started, but you're not actively making that direction happen. You're just letting go, and the foot can come down. It might sound the same, but you will have a different experience of that. And so the passive version might give you access actually to sensing the weight of your leg. You might also feel a little underlying head-tail connection as the leg comes down, with that release that's part of the connection of sitting bone up into skull as a result of releasing through the leg. Okay, so once you've done a few active and a few more passive in this thigh lift action, let's put it into knee drop. So we're going to do a very familiar exercise for contemporary dance people, where the knees go one way and the head goes the other way. This is our first part of knee drop, an arm circle, and then we'll go knee drop and then find a thigh lift here. So it's this action of the thigh lifting, but now connected to the floor. So we have this swing, it's the same creasing of the hip, but we're now in this different orientation, a spiral through the lower. And so go ahead and feel that for yourself. And you can feel it firstly as quite separate events, so the knees dropping, the thigh lifting, a return from thigh lift, a return from knee drop. Now that's going to feel quite heavy going because you're reinitiating each of those actions. But it can be quite useful to feel them as separate events. And then feel them as more connected. Knee drop into thigh lift, return from thigh lift, return from knee drop. So here we're now really activating a lot more of the lower body, even though this leg, the underneath leg, doesn't go so much, doesn't do so many things. It's still on the way back up, it's joining in. Tailbone might feel like it's being activated a little bit more as we take that thigh lift. And then to return pelvis back to the supine hook position. There's a little reach through back at sacrum maybe. So get that going in your own way. You might find it with more momentum. And then let's add on. We've got the opposite arm. We can take an arm circle across ourselves. You can leave the knee there and take an arm circle across. So this is more of a body half feeling, or more of an upper body feeling, as that arm can circle over your head, bring your skull with it. So I can do it just with my arm, but I'm going to activate more of my upper body to bring my head turning and even a little bit of condensing. So that feeling that we had with the X's and the O's, bring the top of the head ever so slightly in towards my navel center. Activating through this upper limb. And then let's finish with an arm circle all the way, bringing that leg with you to come back. And go the other side, knee drop, leg swing, and then activating the whole of the other arm. Feeling a connection from the palm to the shoulder blade, into the spine with the top of the skull. Seeing that hand as it circles over. And this opposite arm, which is on the ground, has some activation. It's not entirely passive. So this underlying sense of radial symmetry is ongoing as I'm mobilizing now through just this arm and skull. And then I'll end with an arm circle to bring the thigh back. So we are going to get onto some level change, I promise. We've been on our back for a while. Knee drop, thigh lift, and then let's coordinate now a return from the thigh lift with an arm circle over the top, pushing yourself to sit. And then finding a body half condensing onto the ground to bring you back into the floor. Knee drop, thigh lift, arm circle, sitting, condensing left body half. Now you can find that getting back into the floor without really condensing in the spine, you could stay long the whole way, that's possible. Or you could find more of the sagittal flexion through the spine. That might help you condense into the ground a little bit more. It might help you, it might give you more time flexing through the arm to come into the ground, rather than staying long the whole time. So I encourage you to explore a little bit the organisation of head-tail as you find yourself coming in and out of the ground. You might find more rotation. You might find sagittal flexion. You might find lateral flexion. You might find lateral flexion the other way. And you come to sit. Next time you come to sit, let's pause there. Nice. So from here, let's find the hands behind ourselves, shifting from one side to the other side. So we've got this knee drop action in sitting. And see what happens through the spine. This might feel like it becomes more of a rotation to see behind you. And you can start including a thigh lift, almost overlapping. You take the knee drop into a thigh lift, knee drop into a thigh lift, and see if you can start to make that a little press through the shin and the hand. So the pelvis takes a lateral shift in space. So I've gone from knee drop, knee drop, knee drop adding thigh lift, knee drop adding thigh lift, knee drop adding thigh lift, lateral pelvic shift. Now my hand might stay on the ground, my hand might come off the ground. Skull and spine might leave me in space. I might look already to where I'm going. Skull and spine might find more lateral flexion here. How does that feel? Skull and spine might find more sagittal flexion. What does that do? So playing with this knee drop, thigh lift, lateral pelvic shift, adding in, exploring for yourself these three possibilities of spine to find more sagittal flexion, to find more lateral flexion. Ooh, it feels very different. Or to find more rotation. And so I'm bending through my elbows, I'm pivoting on my hand. So to make this easier, I'm definitely using the heel of my hand to pivot. And then let's wind it down to just knee drop and leg swing. And then just knee drop. And then let's find, back on the ground, knee drop, and then let's find the head in the opposite direction. Knee drop to hand, knee drop to opposite hand. And the next time you find yourself in a knee drop, pause, bring your skull to the middle. And here we'll find a little push to find heel rock, but now from the outside edge of one foot and the inside edge of the other foot, pressing into the ground to find a heel rock now in this supine hook rotated position. And you can explore just pushing with the inside edge of the top leg, top foot, or just the outside edge of the underneath foot, and see what that does. So we're playing around with the relationship of leg to pelvis to spine, and seeing what that information does to the experience of the pelvis. and the messages through the vertebrae to the skull. And then find 2 feet again. And then pause, exhale, bring pelvis to the middle. And notice what you feel here, seeing if you can tap into some sense of symmetry between the right side and the left side. For me, it feels very unsymmetrical because I very much sensitized the underside of my right shoulder blade, right side of pelvis, come back up to the middle, and I can really feel the difference between my 2 halves. And then going to the left or to the other side of your diagonal knee drop. And then finding a rock here. Again, starting with 2 foot, so pushing 2 feet, pushing from the inside of the top foot and the underneath the bottom foot. And then exploring just one of those. And it might feel like the push starts to happen from different places. Trying to stay with the foot. I notice that when I use the outside edge of my left foot, my knee starts to rise a little bit. And explore for yourself what happens. And then 2 feet together. And then slowing it down. Finding an exhale, navel center, bringing you back to the middle. And then take your legs long. Let's find a heel rock. Sensing into how heel rock feels now. Great. And then take a little pause, recuperate, however you would like to recuperate. So recuperation could mean resting. It could mean doing something different to what you were already doing. It could mean changing facing, changing base of support. So, I'd like us to explore a little bit more for this cross-lateral connection, which we were already doing quite a lot with this knee drop, leg swing, level change stuff. But let's take a moment to find a big diagonal X position on the ground again. And take a rock from one heel rather than 2 legs simultaneously. Let's activate through one heel and send that through to the opposite hand. And sometimes if your legs are very wide, you might not get enough impetus. If you're quite narrow, it might not feel like the message passes across core so easily. If you're very turned out, it might be more useful to find the center of the heel on the ground so that the thigh into the pelvis has a little bit more space. But as ever with these BF exercises, it's really a template for exploration, and you don't have to keep doing it the same way. You can make these different modifications to see what happens. So if I find my right heel sending the message through to left shoulder blade, I can feel still that sense of head-tail connection, even though now I'm initiating from the periphery, from my right lower, traveling through to my left upper, crossing my midline, from lower body to upper body. And then I can switch to this other cross-lateral connection, from my left heel, from my left lower to right upper. Again, noticing what happens here. If I let go a little bit through my pelvis, or stabilize a little bit through tailbone, what starts to happen? If I try and keep free in the tail, I definitely need more grip because my socks are starting to slip. How much pressure through the heel do I need? And how much is too much? You know, we were talking earlier about this sort of like very muscularized activation with a thigh lift. How is it here to do it with more sense of free flow? A relaxed, externally rotated leg, maybe even internally rotated leg. What does that do to your experience of your cross-lateral connection? And then take a pause, finding again the right knee and the left elbow. Let's find more of a stable connection of connecting elbow to knee across the midline. And again on the other side, elbow to knee through the midline, crossing the midline. So the periphery coming towards the core of the mid limb at the elbow and the knee. Great. When you've done that a few times, let's play with X rolls, diagonal X rolls. And we can do these in a few different ways. On Tuesday, I was exploring upper leading to find a diagonal sit-up. This time, let's do upper leading to find a roll across ourselves. So I'm going to see my left hand with my eyes and then peel my hand off the ground. And I will have a sense of my fingertips, not going necessarily sideways, but going slightly on that diagonal that we just found in the cross-lateral connection. So slightly to my right high zone. And I'm going to keep reaching through my fingertips. Now, at a certain point, my legs would want to get involved to turn me, and I'm going to try and resist that for as long as possible, so that it's my spine that turns first. And then that brings my pelvis with me. And I keep going onto my front surface, and I'm going to have to just ease my arm out of the way by lifting my head. Now, there's a couple of ways to come back onto your back surface from being on your front. Let's do it with the leg leading first this time. So, my left leg will slide towards my right. And I'm going to lift up my leg with as minimal effort as possible, imagining that that left leg started in my right hand. Sliding the left leg across the right so my toes can find the ground. And then I'm going to turn from the little toe first, turn my leg out, and try and find my heel on the ground. Carry on rolling across my heel. And as I do that, my pelvis is getting involved, my upper body is starting to rotate, but I'm trying to resist with my upper body as long as possible, finding the left leg on the ground, and then the left arm opening. So it might feel more like a body half action at that last part, but the right hand is in counter tension to that left unwinding leg, giving me that sense of the cross-lateral. So sped up, right, left fingertips leading, spiraling across myself. And then left leg leading, sliding across right, finding heel. Right arm is coming underneath my head, finding myself onto my back. It's a lot of words. Have a play in your own way. I'm going to do the other side. So finding right fingertips, easing across my midline, reaching to the left high diagonal, rib cage coming with me, spine coming with me, tailbone coming with me, legs are heavy to roll onto my front. And then from this big exposition on my front, sliding my right leg. Now again, I'm going to try and do this with as minimal muscular effort as possible. It's going to feel very tempting to go into the glutes and into the lower back immediately, but can you slide your leg, keep it fairly relaxed as you cross the midline, turning that leg out, rotating through the length of the leg to bring you onto your back surface. So we're starting from the upper, and it's traveling across the midline into the lower, from supine to prone, and then to reverse from prone to supine. We're going from a lower, traveling into the upper. Great. So keeping that leg connected to the ground as much as possible, so the heel, you can roll over the ball of the heel. And when you've evened up right and left, re-find a heel rock so you can just take a little recuperation. Seeing how heel rock feels now after having explored right and left with more rotation. What is it to come back to this lower, simultaneous lower initiation through the heels? And then let go of heel rock. Bring your knees into the supine hook position, and let's re-find knee drop, thigh lift, arm circle, sitting. And in your own way, re-finding this material to play with coming up, out of the floor. And finding your way back into the floor. Putting all these different things together, however you wish. So in your own way, playing with this level change, using the underlying support of head-tail connection so that you find yourself sitting, lying, and everywhere in between. And you can take this at whatever tempo you like. You might start to feel like a lot of momentum is possible, or you might go more steadily. And I remind you of the work that we did with head-tail connection that might be giving you some new surprises. How is it to find more of the lateral condensing through the spine? What about sagittal flexion, this concave relationship of skull to tail, the front surface of your body? Or to find a lot of rotation that might bring you into these diagonal X rolls that could take you across yourself, in and out of the floor. And so seeing your hands is quite helpful as a guide to keep bringing you somewhere in space. And if you start to feel a little bit dizzy, you're always welcome to close the eyes, slow down, stabilize. And you can allow yourself to come in and out of the floor however you like. keep using your body's weight as something to condense into the ground, something to slide on the ground, something to press into the ground, using the whole of your body to do this. You could push just from a little toe, just from the center of the palm. And you can keep doing the same movement a few times, but with different notions of organization. Upper leading, lower leading, spine in these different organizations of condensing, rotating, flexing. And eventually you will find yourself on 2 feet to find, or 1 foot to find yourself coming into a walking in space. But you might get there through crawling, you might get there through some unusual spiral to get yourself out of the ground. Don't feel like you need to rush, but eventually have a little walk around your space. Sensing how you sense walking on these 2 feet now, from this much larger base of support to a very small base of support. Feeling all the parts mobilized and hopefully connecting to a sense of your whole body with every part involved. And let's come and gather by the computer for a little check-in, questions, comments. So we just did another revisiting of developmental pattern support for differentiation and reintegration of parts and whole, with an emphasis today on level change of sitting to lying, which we did primarily through the knee drop, thigh lift, arm circle material. So if anyone has any questions or comments, I would be happy to hear them.